千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together.
And I think everyone remembers this from last time. What we did was that we did our sectional analysis. So I was pointing out that we had many repeating characters from line 1 down to line 8. And also from 1 to 8, we have repeating patterns of A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B. So this is the poetic structure. And if you read the translation, you see exactly why it is that way. And here we can see that there's a whole bunch of ideas that can be a little bit unconventional. If one wishes to shrink it, one must first expand it. So the conventional idea is that, well, if you want to shrink it, you shrink it. Problem, though, that we face in real life is that when you attempt to do something, you get pushback, you get resistance. So the better way, the more effective way is that rather than to do the thing as you are intending, it's better to consider the possibility of the complement. When you do the complement, you can then allow nature, allow the Tao with the balancing effect to do the other part for you as it restores that universal balance. So that's why we say that if you wish to shrink it, we expand. Because once you have expanded, the natural consequence is that shrinking begins. And this is from observing nature. When we see things becoming strong and then starting to get weak, we see empires being built, being powerful, and then begin to disintegrate. So it's a pattern that seems to be embedded in everything. So we want to use the same thing as well in our everyday interactions, although it can be pretty hard to visualize, pretty hard to understand, which is why for this particular chapter, it is especially important to use stories to illustrate the principles. So we also talked about the second part, where the metaphors being used are fish and sharp instruments of the state. So these are both talking about the same thing. These are meant to be seen as the knowledge of human nature that a Tao master can use to either gain an advantage, an edge, or to manipulate people, but out of compassion, the Tao master, rather than to do that, rather than to gain the advantage, will be using that knowledge to benefit people. So that is why the soft overcomes the hard, that's line 10. And then fish cannot leave the depths, meaning that you keep certain things in the back pocket. That's what that means. And then the sharp instruments of the state cannot be shown to the people. Same thing. The weapons of the state, the sharp instruments that can damage, can be kept, should not be used. To have knowledge of human nature, human weakness, is very convenient, very handy. Now, it allows you to recognize when it is being used against you. You can prepare for that. You can defend and protect yourself against that. And it doesn't mean that you want to use it to dominate other people, to conquer people, etc. So, having said all that, we can now take a look at what I would call the key to Tao Te Ching 36, the key to understanding this chapter. So, when you have back and forth, and what I mean is, in order to shrink, you must first expand. I can summarize all of that by the following. I can say this chapter is all about the skillful use of the yin and yang principle. What do I mean by that? Well, first, let me bring in the yin and yang principle, the symbol, and then we can kind of make notations, make it a little bit easier to see. So there's a certain thing that you want to accomplish. That would be like a goal that you have. So I want to point to one side of the yin and yang symbol and just arbitrarily point to that as the goal. So you want to do one particular thing. Rather than to act on that goal directly, in the Tao, we recognize that it may be better to focus your time and attention and energy on its complementary opposites. That is, your action can be aimed on the other side. So notice that this is conceptual and arbitrary. So your goal may be on the yin side instead of on the yang side. If your goal is on the yin side, you want to consider taking action on the yang side. So keep the main idea and also keep in mind that your goal on one particular side may require that you act on the yin within the yang or the yang within the yin. So with that in mind, let's continue on. Here's how we can express that whole idea. The best strategy may be to act on the opposite or the reverse, and then let the balancing power of the Tao manifest naturally. So now you can see, with that sort of as the overall statement, we can review the examples from the chapter. In order to shrink, first you must expand. So your goal is one thing, but your action, your initial action to start with is the complementary opposite. And you want to do that and then step back and allow the balancing power of the Tao to take over, and thus making everything very effortless for you, very smooth, requiring no strife. So it'll take some time to really master this and then be able to bring this into your life. But once you've succeeded in doing that, I think you will find that it's very powerful. And then the other example from the chapter is in order to weaken, first you must strengthen. Now, as I mentioned previously, conventional thinking is that what if I'm going to weaken something? I'm just going to do that. I'm going to weaken it. That may run you into the problem of your attempt to weaken something arouses resistance. Every action brings about its opposite reaction. So that resistance becomes strength. So your attempt to weaken something has actually achieved the opposite. That is, you've made it stronger. And that's contrary to your goal. So the reverse is that if you strengthen something and then allow the natural process to weaken it, then you will accomplish your goal while doing seemingly the opposite. Now, another example from the chapter, just to review, in order to discard, first you must promote. So this is also difficult to understand as we live in a consumer society. So we see marketing and promotion all the time. Now we forget that the pattern of the Tao is very much alive and well in our, consumerism also. And all the fads, the latest trends that are heavily promoted and shared and has gone viral, they're all eventually discarded. So actually, to discard something, first you must promote, meaning that if you oversaturate something, it becomes that which you get tired of, and therefore you're more than willing to let it go. And that is sort of like, when someone wants to quit bad habits, they just go nuts on it for a while until they get absolutely to the saturation point and beyond. They become completely sick of it. They don't want to do it anymore. And then from that point on, very easy for them to go cold turkey. So again, it's a pattern of life that is everywhere. And then another example from the chapter, in order to seize, first you must give. And we talked about this in a couple of different ways. We talked about it in a karmic sense, that you must give something positive, positive energy, in order to receive that same positive energy reflected back on you. And if you were to give out destructive negative energy, invariably, that is also what gets returned. Now, there's another context for that, which we're going to talk about today, that in order to win something, to seize something, in order to, in the sense of getting something permanently, really making something your own, first, you must give, as in letting it go. So it's only when you let go of something that it can truly become your own. So we'll see how that works in just a moment. But now I want to make sure that we also talk about examples from real life. Examples from the chapter that we talked about last time can be a little abstract. So let's take a look at real life for just a moment. In order to gain knowledge, first you must empty yourself of preconceptions. So to receive knowledge, you have to get rid of what you regard as existing knowledge in your mind. So to get, you have to lose. So again, you can see the interplay between yin and yang. your goal is to gain something, your action is to lose something. And if you think about pouring tea, well, you have to empty your cup, you have to drink the tea that you have before the cup is empty to receive more tea. In order to handle an incoming attack, first you back away so you can deflect or redirect. So you see this a lot in Tai Chi. In Tai Chi, it's never fighting fire with fire, countering force with force. It's always deflection, redirection. So rather than to advance forward, meeting the attack, in order to do that, the best way to do it is actually to back away so you can deflect that incoming energy, to redirect that incoming power, so then you can cause your opponent to overextend and lose balance. Yet another example, think about what happens when you want to do a high jump. Well, you have to crouch down in order to jump. So you have to lower your body in order to raise or elevate the position of your body off the ground. And an example from one of the Tao masters is that think about a commercial airliner that before it is able to take off, before it begins its flight, it backs away from the terminal. It's going back before it's going forward. And it occurs to me that this is how I usually leave a parking lot. I back away from my parking spot and then I drive forward. And if you think about a cruise ship, it would be similar, back away from the terminal and then go forward. So all throughout life, there's this kind of pattern. So recognizing this pattern is the key to Tao Te Ching 36, and be able to use this pattern is part of the mastery in the Tao. It's not easy, but it can be done. So the story that I talked about last time, hopefully you guys heard that story. I needed to tell that story because, it's hard to understand. It can be pretty hard to understand how this works. So the stories are very useful to illustrate. And you may recall that the story was about the news anchor, the overblown, arrogant news anchor who was getting too big in terms of his ego. So rather than to reprimand or demote, which would cause its own set of problems, the way that this particular anchor was handled was that he got expanded. His responsibilities, his position were expanded, and he was happy about this elevation of prestige and position for him. What he did not realize was that this was the application of the Tao against him. So he definitely ended up in the story much reduced in terms of his ego, in terms of his popularity, in terms of his position. So hopefully you had a chance to listen to that story last time. If not, I think it can be easily found in YouTube online. As I mentioned, I want to use a different story to illustrate the same ideas for everyone today. Rather than a story from modern times, the second story is from ancient times. So it occurred to me that this is a story that is very suitable for this chapter because I noticed that some masters refer to a story when they explain this particular chapter. The name of the story is called 七擒孟獲. Let me break that down for you. 4 characters that we have here. The first character is 7. The second character means capture. So you can see the translation here, the 7 captures. Then the last 2 characters, well, that's the personal name. So the third character there, that's the family name or the surname. It's M-E-N-G, but it's actually pronounced more like M-O-N-G, Meng. And then the given name is 獲, 孟獲. So the 7 captures of Menghuo. When Tao masters refer to this, when they explain 36, they usually rely on cultural familiarity. So they will talk about, it's just like the story 七擒孟獲, where in order to truly capture the loyalty of this man, Menghuo, it was necessary to release him, to capture him and then release him 7 times. Now, usually that's as much details as they get into because they rely on the cultural context. So this makes it tough when you cross the cultural barrier from east to west to have the same explanation or description make sense, because oftentimes we in the West are lacking the same cultural context in the East. So think about the cultural context that we do have and the trouble that it can cause people who are not familiar with it. If I say, in attempting to make a joke, I say, Luke, I am your father. Everybody gets the cultural context. It's from Star Wars. So I am possibly speaking about something, related to the Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker thing. Now, it doesn't have to be pop culture. It doesn't have to be movies. It could be literature. So, for example, if you talk about yourself and someone that you are in love with as Romeo and Juliet, that's a cultural reference. So it depends on what your intentions are. You may, for instance, want to express that you and this person you love come from dramatically different worlds, even worlds that are in conflict. Similar to how Romeo and Juliet come from warring clans in the Shakespearean story. You may not want to draw the additional reference that the story of Romeo and Juliet ends tragically. They die in the end. You may not want that particular reference. You may want to describe your love story as one for the ages, like Romeo and Juliet, for instance. But the point is, we talk using these cultural references without going into a lot of details, because we assume that other people are also familiar with the cultural references. So, Romeo and Juliet, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo, Juliet at the balcony, etc. The cultural references go on and on. But now, we have an opportunity because many people in the West have never ever heard of 七擒孟獲. So this is not something that you will easily get unless you grew up in an Eastern culture. Where is it from? Well, it's from 三國演義. 三国演義 usually translated as Romance of the Three Kingdoms, a rather poor translation, but that's the standard translation. Romance of the Three Kingdoms is a historical novel set in ancient China, and it's from thousands of years ago. It documents the events from many centuries ago. So the story is not well known outside of the Mandarin-speaking world, so we do have an opportunity here. 三国演義 is also known in many other parts of Asia. It's very popular. It's constantly adapted into movies and television series. So it's definitely a cultural context that people will get. Or if they're not familiar with the story, they can easily find references for that. Not so easy here. So in order to tell the story of 七擒孟獲, I would need to introduce you to the main characters. First, we have 诸葛亮. So the way that he's written it shows a problem with the pinyin romanization. As a native English speaker, you could look at that and say, oh, Zhuge, like rhymes with huge. That's his name. No, it's actually 诸葛. That's one of the rare compound surnames for the Chinese people. Most Chinese surnames are a single syllable. There is a few that are composed of two characters, and this is one of them. So 诸葛would be the surname, the family name, and Liang, the last character that you see there, would be the given name. So it sounds like 诸葛亮. He is the most famous military strategist in Chinese history. Now, many of you listening today, either live or perhaps watching YouTube or listening to YouTube, you may say, oh, but wait, I thought that was Sun Tzu, Art of War. No. The most famous military strategist in Chinese history indeed is not Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu is better known in the West because of Art of War, the popularity of Art of War. Itself a poorly translated work, poorly translated title. But from the Chinese perspective, Sun Tzu is not the prominence, the most, the number one in history. So it's actually 诸葛亮. Sun Tzu will be number two. So I think it's a good idea for you to get to know a little bit about this strategist. Here's a depiction of 诸葛亮. This is a statue from mainland China. Of course, the depiction here is probably an idealized version of 诸葛亮. Now, the thing to know about 诸葛亮is that he was an avid student of the Tao, and he was an accomplished master of the Tao. Oftentimes, as told in stories, legends, he would infuse Tao principles into his strategies for great effect. So for him to utilize the Tao, it meant that he was very familiar with all the Tao principles that we're talking about here, as you will see. Also, there is another thing that I want to bring out and emphasize and highlight for everybody. The popularity of 诸葛亮, his prominence reflects a cultural emphasis on brains over brawn. So this is a little bit different between East and West. In the West, think about the cultural emphasis on brawn. Think about our obsession with athletes, sports heroes. Think about what happens in a James Bond movie. It's the man of action who overcomes the evil genius. So it's the quick wit, fast reflex, gunplay, and fisticuffs of James Bond that overcomes the mind, the invention, the plots and schemes of the mad doctor or the evil genius. That is distinctly Western. The Eastern emphasis can oftentimes be the very opposite. That those who rely on physical skills, those are relics of the past. That now and going forward into the future, it's always going to be intelligence, the human mind, that wins at the end. So as I say here, why exert yourself when you can apply intelligence? Why sweat over something when you can apply intelligence? Now, his adversary is the very opposite. You can think of his adversary as sort of the ancient Chinese version of Conan the Barbarian. And I'll introduce him in the next slide. Menghuo. So again, the weakness of the pinyin system makes this difficult to pronounce correctly. It's like Meng, Huo, O sound. Mighty warrior king who ruled beyond the southern borders of ancient China. And here's a depiction of him. He's depicted as heavily bearded. As you can see here, he's said to be a man of great physical strength and also very skilled in battle prowess. So the entertainment, the adaptation for screen, either movies or television, is usually depicted as a physically imposing man with great strength. Now, not only was this man dominant within his own tribe, but he was also influential in the southern region overall. It meant that among all the tribes and kingdoms beyond the southern borders of ancient China, he had many friends, many allies. He was in a position to rally them together for a particular cause. So what brought these two into conflict? Well, you see, Zhuge Liang was intending to go north. He wanted to take his army to the north for an extended military campaign. But this meant that he would be leaving his backyard wide open. So his goal didn't seem to have much to do with the southern region. He wanted to go north. Now remember, the skill in using yin and yang is that in order to do one particular thing, you should always consider the complementary opposite. So Zhuge Liang was intimately familiar with yin and yang and its application to military strategy and life. So he knew without a doubt that before he headed north, he needed to take care of the south. In other words, rather than to leave himself open, he wanted to secure the southern border before embarking on his military campaign to the north. Let me bring that up. Using the Tao principles we are focusing on today, he realized that he needed to secure his southern border before venturing north. So you might think that, well, he could always leave a garrison, he could leave a force behind to guard the southern border, and then take the majority of his force to the north. Well, that was not the best plan, because if he had to leave much of a force in the south, it meant a dramatically reduced the strength that he would be able to carry with him. And therefore, he realized that he needed to take care of Menghuo before he did anything serious with the north. So what I want to show everyone first is this map of ancient China from many centuries ago, and you'll see the date over here. So with a little bit of calculation, you can figure out that this is some 17 centuries ago. So back in those days, in ancient China, you had the three warring kingdoms: the Wei, the Wu, and the Han. So the lower left-hand side, the part that shows as pink, this is the territory that Zhuge Liang is controlling. The goal that Zhuge Liang had, his side, is to restore the legitimate rule of the Han Dynasty. The Han Dynasty was the dynasty right before the Three Kingdoms, and it's also a period that is regarded as the flowering of Chinese civilization. So you will, even today, you will hear Mandarin-speaking people refer to themselves as the Han Chinese. So Zhuge Liang was regarded as the legitimate successor of that. And so he wished to mount his military campaign into the other kingdoms to win territories from them so that the Han Empire can be restored. That was the goal. So you can tell that for him to go north would leave the southern borders dangerously exposed to the regions beyond. Now, he wanted to, as he looked at the powers in the south, he noticed Menghuo right away, this ancient Chinese version of Conan the Barbarian. The barbarian king. He wanted to win Menghuo over to his side rather than to subjugate him, because this is a fierce warrior who bows down to no one. So Zhuge Liang realized that it wasn't good enough just to be able to capture him. It was not a good idea to capture and kill him, because that would only bring about more problems. For instance, someone else will take his place. Another powerful barbarian king from the south will take his place, and then you have the same problem all over again. So do you continue killing until you have no more kings or tribal chiefs left to kill? Or his kinfolk, his friends, his allies will come seeking revenge, then you may have a bigger problem. So he needed to think beyond the conventional way. He needed to look at the goal that he had and then focus his energies on the opposite in a skillful way to accomplish what he wants. So what he really wanted was to capture the loyalty of Menghuo, and through that loyalty, be able to influence all of the other kings and chiefs of the areas beyond the southern borders of ancient China. In other words, take advantage of how influential he was with all the tribes to the south. If Zhuge Liang is able to get Menghuo to join his cause, he knew that the other tribes and kingdoms would likely follow. So he ventured to the south with his army, and he encountered Menghuo for the first time in the field of battle. So in ancient China, the army is mostly foot soldiers, infantry. Now, as you gain in your experience and battle prowess, you can get promoted and you can eventually be elevated into the ranks of a commanding officer. So a commander, a lieutenant general, major general, general, these will be the warriors who get to be mounted on horseback instead of walking on foot. Not foot soldiers anymore, but mounted soldiers. So these mounted warriors were the generals, the commanders that Zhuge Liang had to send against Menghuo. So he initially sent 2 of these warriors against Menghuo. So they fought him on horseback. And then they appeared to be defeated, that they seemed to shrink before his battle prowess. They turned around on their horse and ran away. Now, to Menghuo, powerful, mighty warrior, this seemed perfectly natural because he was used to being the best, the strongest on the battlefield. So, of course, these lesser warriors would run away from him. Not a big surprise. So he gave chase, and they lured him into a canyon. And the canyon walls are very high on both sides, and the canyon itself is quite narrow. He seemed tantalizingly close to capturing the 2 warriors who tried to fight him. But suddenly, 2 more warriors on horseback suddenly appear behind him, cut off his escape route. Now, because of his confidence, he wasn't initially all that concerned. But then the 2 mounted warriors that he was chasing reversed course to face him. So now he was facing 4 seasoned warriors on horseback instead of the 2 that he fought before. And then he realized that the 2 that he fought before, they were actually holding back. They were actually pretending to lose. And now they fought him with all out strength. So together, the 4 of them were able to defeat him. Perhaps any single one of them was not his match, but the 4 of them working together, they were more than his match. So they defeated him, they tied him up, and they brought him before the military strategist, Zhuge Liang. So Meng Huo at this point figured, well, okay, I lost. I'm probably dead. I'll probably get decapitated. No big deal. This comes with the territory for a warrior. I may as well go out with defiance. That was his thought. So he was defiant in the face of his primary adversary, and he considered this to be Zhuge Liang, because Zhuge Liang was in command of the entire army, plus all the generals. He said, well, you didn't really defeat me. I was careless. I fell for your ambush. I do not admit defeat because I know you cannot beat me fair and square on the battlefield. If you're going to execute me, let's just get on with it. Just do it. Just go ahead. To this, Zhuge Liang only laughed. He loosened Meng Huo's ropes personally, loosening his bonds. Now, this didn't mean that Meng Huo could attack, because Zhuge Liang was well protected by warriors, quite a few warriors all around him. And Zhuge Liang engaged him in conversation. He asked about family, he asked about his region, his thoughts on different things. They walked around the encampment of the Han army as they talked. And Meng Huo saw that Zhuge Liang's soldiers were mostly very weak looking. Like a lot of them seemed sickly or elderly. So as they conversed, he pointed to them and he said to Zhuge Liang, look, I had no idea your army was so feeble. Had I known this, I would have attacked you with my full strength and easily defeat you. To this, Zhuge Liang laughed again and said, you're free to go, and released him. And Meng Huo was a little puzzled. What? He's actually letting me go. And then he thought, this man is supposed to be the greatest strategist of our time. He doesn't seem all that impressive to me. So he went back. This was the first capture of Meng Huo. He was released. First capture and first release. He went back to his camp, went back to his men. He told them about what he saw. He told them, not only did I get a good read on the strength of his force, I also paid attention to where his command center was located. So here's what we're going to do. We will assemble a force, an elite force of our 500 best warriors. Tonight, we'll sneak into their camp, we'll memorize the location, and we'll go directly there. We'll go directly where Zhuge Liang sleeps, and we'll capture him. So everybody nodded. Great plan. Let's do that. We can easily defeat Zhuge Liang, supposedly the master strategist who will become a defeated, vanquished foe for us. So that night, everything seems to go according to plan. Meng Huo and his men, 500 warriors, they were able to penetrate deep into Zhuge Liang's encampment. They were stealthy. They seemed undetected. So as he expected, he memorized the location of the command tent, and he was able to easily identify that. So they went there, they burst in, only to find that it's empty. It's a trap. His realization was too late. He was suddenly surrounded by actual soldiers, not the sickly and elderly ones that he saw, but a force that was healthy, strong, and much larger than the 500 warriors that he brought with him. So they were once again able to capture him easily. Too late, Menghuo realized that previously, when they were walking around the encampment, what he saw was what Zhuge Liang intended for him to see. So once again, he found himself all tied up before Zhuge Liang. He spat, still defiant. He said, "Tricks, tricks, and more tricks. You want me to admit defeat? I will not do that. Winning and losing happens all the time in battle and mean nothing. Let me go, and I will give you a battle you will truly remember." So once again, Zhuge Liang laughed about this, and he said, "All right, you're free to go, just as before. Next time, make sure you are better prepared." So this was the second capture and release of Menghuo. So by now, I think you can begin to detect the pattern that Zhuge Liang's intention was not exactly to capture Menghuo physically. According to the principles we're studying today, in order to truly capture someone, you must let him go first. That's what Zhuge Liang is doing. So upon reflection, Menghuo realized that when they went into the camp, penetrated deep into the camp undetected, they weren't really undetected. They did exactly what Zhuge Liang wanted them to do, so he arranged for the soldiers to be lax and let them pass and pretend not to notice them. They weren't as stealthy as they thought. So, fuming about this, mad about this, Menghuo went back and said to the others, Zhuge Liang, he thinks he's so tricky, but he's not the only one who can play this game. I've got tricks of my own. So he called for his younger brother, who was a mighty warrior in his own right. And he said, "Here's what we will do. You take 100 of your best men with you and also bring treasures as a peace offering." The problem that we had the last time was that we burst in on a fake tent that was actually empty. We can do a much better job by having you in there to secure the location of Zhuge Liang. And then when I go in again, I join up with you and we capture him together. So what I want you to do is to take your 100 men and bring treasures as a peace offering, go to Zhuge Liang and tell them you are going to surrender and join him. So his younger brother protested. That is completely without honor. And Menghuo says, "Would you relax? You're not really going to surrender, you idiot. You're going to pretend to surrender. See? Then, late at night, I'm going to attack with our main force, and together we will capture Zhuge Liang and bring him back to our camp. Get it now? Oh, all right." So they follow this plan. And the younger brother approached Zhuge Liang's encampment under a flag of truce. He explained that he has decided to oppose his brother, that he hated his brother. He wanted to forge an alliance with Zhuge Liang. So Zhuge Liang seemed vastly pleased by this. He seemed to suspect nothing. He welcomed the younger brother warmly. He said, "Excellent, let us celebrate our alliance." He ordered his men to bring wine, and then he proposed a toast. To many victories we will achieve together. 干杯, they all drank to that. 干杯, by the way, is cheers or bottoms up. It's closest to bottoms up. That night, as per plan, Menghuo launched his attack. As he intended, he wanted to join forces with his brother, who should already have either captured Zhuge Liang or pinpointed his exact location. And together with Zhuge Liang as their prisoner, they would fight their way out, leaving a trail of blood and destruction. That is the plan. Sadly, it didn't happen that way. He was able to identify the horses of his younger brother and his men, so he was able to find where they were. But when they found the actual younger brother and the 10 and the 100 elite warriors that he brought with him, he saw that they were all passed out. And they all had empty wine goblets next to them. They've been drugged, every single one of them. Once again, just like before, he was surrounded by enemy soldiers. Once again, just like before, he was all tied up and captured and brought before Zhuge Liang. Zhuge Liang himself still seemed completely relaxed, just, waiting to hear what he's going to say this time. So Menghuo was angry. He said, "You call this a victory? This was not a victory. This was my younger brother being stupid and getting drugged by you. It's his fault, not mine. There's no way I would admit defeat." So let me ask you this question. Can you guess what Zhuge Liang's reaction would be by now? That's right. He said, "All right, this might not have been the best plan that you could have come up with. You're free to go." So this was the third capture and release of Menghuo. With every defeat, Menghuo felt he learned something new and would not make the same mistake again. He thought about it, and it occurred to him that he should leverage the unique strengths of his native land rather than to play Zhuge Liang's game, because whenever he did that, he was always at a disadvantage. But if he leveraged the unique strengths of his native land, then the advantage will be on his side. So he went to speak with another tribe in the south and asked the chief to borrow his soldiers. These soldiers were completely unlike the Han soldiers belonging to Zhuge Liang. They looked like wild men. They would rub black dye on themselves in different terrifying patterns to create this demonic appearance. And in battle, they would charge, yelling at the top of their lungs to inspire fear in their enemies. This is how they fought. So for them, fear is actually a weapon. So with these demonic-looking, demon-faced warriors, they approached the battlefield once again, and then they psyched themselves up, yelled and charged to create that terrifying appearance of an incoming horde of demons. Except it didn't work. The fortification of Zhuge Liang was simply closed. So they went up right against the closed gates. They hammered at it. They batted against it to no reaction, no counterattacks, nothing. So after a while, their initial energy was completely spent. Then Zhuge Liang picked a moment of maximum uncertainty and confusion for them, and that's when the Han soldiers came out to strike. Suddenly, it was the demon-faced soldiers who were now fearing for their lives. So they were all running away, and Meng Huo had no choice but to run away with them. So he rode his horse away from the battle, and right ahead of him, on his escape route, he saw the hated, despised Zhuge Liang sitting in a carriage by a tree, smiling. So then he thought, okay, well, this time you've made a big mistake. You think that you have captured me again, so you're going to be releasing me again. Well, think again, because I am ready to face you and capture you. So the sight of Zhuge Liang enraged but also excited him. His thinking was that, well, perhaps the battle was lost, but I can make up for that by capturing Zhuge Liang. Right now, sitting in a carriage next to a tree, surrounded by just a few guards, he's virtually defenseless. I can easily take on all of his guards, and even more than that. So riding his horse, he charged ahead, intending to attack Zhuge Liang. Then he fell right into a pit in front of Zhuge Liang. The pit that was already prepared in advance and covered over with tree branches. So Meng Huo, man and horse, weapons, armor, everything fell into the pit, trapped, again, easily captured. He raged against the injustice of it all, tied up, and brought in front of Zhuge Liang once again. You may have defeated my soldiers in the field of battle. I admit it. You've defeated my soldiers, but you captured me using nothing but trickery, using a pit. I dare you to release me so I can exact my vengeance on you. To which Zhuge Liang smiled. Very well, you may go. So you see what Zhuge Liang had done this time. The capture and release number 4, the fourth capture, the fourth release. It was a large-scale version of Tai Chi, where instead of encountering force with force, meeting strike with strike, the idea is to back away, to not react, and let the incoming force be spent before taking action. Then the escape route that Meng Huo would follow had already been planned out, had already been designed, and had already been prepared with the trap. which was the pit. So that was number 4. By now, Menghuo was running out of options. He went to one of the few allies he had left, Yang Feng, who was master of the dragon caves. There's a system of caves beyond the southern borders of ancient China called the dragon caves. So Yang Feng was the man who was in command of those caves. So he asked Yang Feng to borrow troops to supplement his own. So what Menghuo did not realize was that Yang Feng had already fought Zhuge Liang before, had already lost on a previous occasion. And at that time, Zhuge Liang decided to spare the lives of him, his family, and all of his tribesmen. So Yang Feng felt indebted to Zhuge Liang. Plus, he had been following and observing the previous 5 encounters between Menghuo and Zhuge Liang. And to be honest, he felt embarrassed for Menghuo. Like, no, they didn't say dude in ancient China, but his sentiment was like, come on, dude, how many times can you lose before you admit defeat? This was getting ridiculous. Therefore, he appeared to agree to Menghuo's demand for the favor. But then, late at night, he ordered his men to subdue Menghuo and tie him up. Then, presented him to Zhuge Liang as a present. So again, Menghuo found himself all tied up in front of Zhuge Liang, his hated adversary. Zhuge Liang again smiled at him and said, let me guess, you will not admit defeat this time either. And Menghuo says, do you even need to ask? This was not a contest of battle prowess at all. This was something this was a betrayal. This was a person that I thought was my friend that betrayed me. Of course I can't admit defeat with this kind of treachery. All right, said Zhuge Liang, you're free to go. This was capture number 5 and release number 5. So you know that there are 7 captures of Menghuo, meaning there are only 2 more. So what's next? Well, Menghuo was at the end of his ropes. After all the defeats he suffered, many of his supply lines were cut, supply lines for his army. And he was having trouble feeding his troops. So he had no choice. He reached out to Zhuge Liang and asked to borrow food. Zhuge Liang said, well, I wouldn't just lend you food or give you food. You wouldn't want it that way either because it lacks honor. What I can do, though, is to give you the opportunity to win the food for yourself and your army. If you can defeat my generals in single combat, I will give you the food for your troops. So Menghuo thought, well, this is right up my alley. Single combat, that's my specialty. None of his generals is a match for me, so he quickly agreed to this. And this helped him save face. He was feeling keenly embarrassed at having to reach out to his enemy to ask to borrow food, but if he can win fair and square in the field of battle, that was all right. He was cool with that. So he faced the generals of Zhuge Liang in the field of battle, and exactly as he expected, he did it very well. One-on-one combat, he had no problems with that. He was able to dispatch multiple generals very easily from his perspective. But then tragedy struck. He got tangled up by ropes. He tripped. Down he went. Tied up in ropes, all of his strength and martial arts skills failed him as he was all trussed up on the ground. Once again, Zhuge Liang let him go. This time didn't even say much, but this had an impact on Menghuo's thought process. He couldn't really blame it on tricks. This time, it was his own carelessness to trip over ropes and get tied up. And even though technically he lost, Zhuge Liang surprised him by letting him keep the food. He considered refusing the food out of honor because he lost after all. But then he thought about his starving men. He had no choice but to accept the food. His head hung low. He no longer had any of the arrogance and defiance that he displayed in their initial encounters. This was capture and release number 6. And here you can see a consistent theme running through the narrative, that Zhuge Liang, as a person of the Tao, as a cultivator and master of the Tao, seeks to do everything in a compassionate way. Why let the men starve? That would be cruel. Why not do the compassionate thing? Keep them fed. And why put them in the field of battle to let them die? If it's possible to resolve something with single combat, why not do that? Minimize the loss of lives. So now, for Menghuo's last attempt, he thought, I finally have it all figured out. He went to his last ally. His last ally was a tribal chief in the south whose warriors wore a special kind of armor. It was an armor made up that was weaved from a very tough vine that grew in the south. The techniques of creating such suit of armor out of that tough vine was a closely held tribal secret, but it was extremely effective. It protected against all kinds of weapons: blades, axe, spears, arrows. Nothing could penetrate this particular armor. So Menghuo reflected, these soldiers are completely invulnerable. It doesn't matter if the enemies use any kind of weapon because nothing gets through. I literally cannot lose with a force like this. Why didn't I think of this from the beginning? So he took this force into battle, and things did not go well. He encountered one thing that could harm his troops. Zhuge Liang had anticipated this strategy as before and decided to attack not with weapons, but with fire. All around Menghuo, his men either beat a hasty retreat or were burned to a crisp. So this supposedly invulnerable force collapsed. And once again, Menghuo found himself captured. And finally, he had enough. He said, 7 battles, 7 losses. There has never been anything as shameful as this in history. I cannot possibly continue. He swore allegiance. Zhuge Liang knew that despite his stubbornness, Meng Huo was a man of his words, a man of honor. Not only was Zhuge Liang able to win Meng Huo over to his side, but through Meng Huo, Zhuge Liang was able to control and influence the other kings and chiefs to the south. So Zhuge Liang accomplished what he wanted, which was to secure his southern border before leading the military campaign to the north. So to that end, he accomplished what he wanted, which was to capture the loyalty of Meng Huo by first releasing him, not just 1 time, 2 times, 7 times. So that is the story from the 3 kingdoms, the 7 captures of Menghuo. So let me ask everyone, our chapter 36, how exactly does our story connect to chapter 36? So the first thing is, as noted, before heading off in one direction, Zhuge Liang had to take care of potential hazards from the other location, the other direction. So in order to attack the north, first secure the south. So this definitely has the flavor of chapter 36 embedded in that. Then, in order to truly capture Meng Huo's loyalty, Zhuge Liang had to first release him. This way, when Meng Huo eventually admitted defeat, it would be a genuine admission, not grudging admission, not admission that will later be reversed into some kind of a betrayal, but loyalty that Zhuge Liang was able to earn. And there's another way that this story connects to chapter 36. At the end of chapter 36, it talks about soft overcoming the hard, keeping the fish in the depths, not show the sharp weapons, the sharp instruments of the state to the people. And this is what it means. Although Zhuge Liang had a deep understanding of human nature, he chose to use his knowledge in a Tao-centric and positive way, rather than for conquest and domination. And this is the reference to the very last part of the chapter that I just mentioned. Soft overcomes the hard. Although Zhuge Liang had powerful weapons, because knowledge is power, knowledge of human weakness, human nature, that's power. He did not use that power against people. So lastly, I want to ask everyone to entertain 3 additional thoughts. First, can you be as tolerant as Zhuge Liang in giving your detractors as many chances as possible? As we go through life, we all have these annoying detractors, critics, enemies, frenemies in some cases. Are you able to give them that many chances? 7 captures, 7 releases? Before you answer that, I want to point out that Zhuge Liang dealt with Meng Huo from a position of strength. So when I say giving people many chances, I don't mean to encourage anyone in an abusive situation to stick around to give the abuser more chances. I think you are well aware of that. So if you find yourself in an abusive situation, you should move on instead. But when you are in a peer-to-peer situation, at work perhaps, are you able to be as tolerant as Zhuge Liang has demonstrated in the story? Number two, can you practice the Tao consistently rather than selectively? That is, are you able to treat people with the same kind of positive, compassionate energy and not pick out a few that you like, that you treat better than the others? So the reason why I say that is because it is only when you are able to practice the Tao consistently that you open up yourself to chances of opportunities of assistance. If you are able to do this consistently for everyone, you may find yourself receiving unexpected assistance from them once in a while. Just like Zhuge Liang received unexpected assistance from Yang Feng, master of the Dragon Caves. Number three, as Zhuge Liang demonstrated in the story, Tao master plan and prepare. They look several steps ahead. So even the escape route that Menghuo would take, they had already planned that out and prepared in advance. Can you do the same? And again, before you answer that, let me point out that we oftentimes hear, go with the flow. Well, that is a superficial Western misconception. The Tao is not about going with the flow. It can be about going with the flow when it is appropriate. More often than not, though, you're going to find that Tao masters are well prepared, just like Zhuge Liang. So I want to encourage you, suggest to you, recommend to you to do the same thing. No matter what you are going into, whether it's a project, a challenge, a task, that you look ahead, you anticipate several steps, look several steps ahead. Plan, prepare in advance. That's actually the Tao. That's actually the Tao. That is the authentic version and not the Western misconception. Now, this is not to say that in the West, we don't get this whole idea about, capturing someone, truly capturing someone by releasing them. This is really about humanity. This is really about human nature, which has no boundaries of East or West. Therefore, let's wrap it up with a Western example. This is musician Sting. In 1985, he performed If You Love Somebody, Set Them Free at the MTV Video Music Awards. And in interviews, he said that he wrote that song as an antidote to every breath you take. Every breath you take is usually seen as a romantic ballet, but he actually wrote it to describe a very attached, obsessive, stalking kind of attention, a very unhealthy kind of love. To get back into balance, he wanted to emphasize, if you love somebody, set them free. And if they come back to you, they are yours. So in the Tao, we also want to approach all of our relationships without obsessive control. And this has the effect of setting everyone free. And having heard the story today about the 7 captures of Menghuo, you know that Zhuge Liang would certainly agree. So I'm happy to say this wraps up our discussion of the meaning behind Tao Te Ching 36 today. We are now ready for the paraphrase. So the purpose of the paraphrase is to demonstrate understanding by expressing the original with modern language. So nothing that we're going to say should contradict the ideas that we have discussed, the strategies, the mastery of yin and yang, of trying to accomplish one thing by putting your thoughts and energies and effort into its complementary opposite. Okay? So here we go. So in the first section, by the way, this is actually a section that extends from 1 down to 8, but we can divide it down into 2. Whenever you have a collection of 8, it's always something that can be divided into 4 and 2. So we have the classic lines. If one wishes to shrink it, one must first expand it. If one wishes to weaken it, one must first strengthen it. Here's the paraphrase. This is a pattern that manifests everywhere. Myriad things expand and then shrink, strengthen and then weaken. Wise cultivators make use of this pattern. So if they wish to shrink or weaken something, they will start by expanding and strengthening it. This may be contrary to what many people are inclined to do, but it works and creates lasting results. What about the following section? We get into discard, promote, seize, and give. And then we wrap the whole thing up and call it subtle clarity. Here's how I would paraphrase. Similarly, in human affairs, things are often promoted and then discarded. Positive or negative energies are often given and then reflected back in similar repeating patterns. Therefore, one can discard something by first promoting it and receive a certain energy by being the first to give it. These strategies are quite effective, but not well understood. Most people are still guided by ego instead of the Tao, and would tend to clash with others rather than to use the soft approach. So when I say most people are still that these strategies are not well understood, I'm referring to the subtlety of the Tao teachings. And that's what line 9 is all about, that these are not well understood. And you can also see in our paraphrase, we have basically made a distinction here between the first 4 lines, drawing from nature, examples that we have observed in nature, whereas from line 5 down to line 8, were applying those examples, those observations to human affairs. So then the last and final section about the soft and weak overcomes the tough and strong. Fish cannot lead the depths. Sharp instruments of the state cannot be shown to the people. Here's how I would like to paraphrase. This is unfortunate because the soft overcomes the hard. So those who do not understand the Tao are at a disadvantage. Those who do understand should use their knowledge wisely. They should treat these strategies like fish swimming in the depths, unseen by most, or devastating weapons kept hidden and never brought out for display. Because the Tao transcends beyond all of that as a force for good. And you can definitely see that Zhuge Liang, as a master of the Tao, as a student, practitioner, and master of the Tao, definitely tried to conduct his life as a force for good. So that is the conclusion of 36. We've now done the paraphrase also. I have prepared for 37, but I think I want to leave our meeting with just 36 to keep all of our ideas and concepts encapsulated in one chapter. So rather than to head into 37 to fill out the time, I want to instead go to the summary. The summary, again, is all about 36. In 36, there's a couple more things that I want to mention. Two things we can learn about the Tao today. First, the way of the Tao always leans toward the compassionate. So I want to talk about these two things because it's not just about the skillful use of yin and yang, which we started talking about in our meeting today. These are the things that I want to leave you with as the summary, because if you do this, if you understand this and practice this, even if your detractors, critics, naysayers, even if they don't appreciate it, you can bet that other people will take notice about what you do, what you have done, and what you are likely to do in the future. So first, the way of the Tao always leans toward the compassionate, always. This comes from the observation about nature being nurturing of life, that nature provides everything life needs to survive and to thrive. So, drawing a conclusion from that, the Tao leans toward the compassionate, the nurturing. So in the story that you heard today, Zhuge Liang sought to minimize the loss of lives. The battles of ancient China were horrible in that after the clash of armies, there's going to be a lot of dead bodies. That's just the nature of war. So as a cultivator of the Tao, Zhuge Liang was someone who wanted to avoid that. Also, it was a compassionate gesture for him to feed the troops of his enemy. So from those two things, you can learn about the soft overcoming the hard. Remember, it was Zhuge Liang deciding to feed the troops of Menghuo that started him thinking maybe I should change my ways. Started him thinking, maybe my adversary is not so bad after all, because he's feeding my men. So I mentioned two things we can learn about the Tao today, this being one of them, the compassion side of it. The other part of it is that the way of the Tao always focuses on the essence over the material. What am I talking about? What do I mean by that? Well, turning enemies into friends is far greater than defeating them physically. It's also far more difficult. So the essence of the Tao is to vanquish your enemies not by defeating them physically, but by turning them into friends. When you turn them into friends, no trace of your enemy remains. That is a far greater way to vanquish your enemies. It's a way that leaves no room for revenge. So here's what I would like everyone to do, and this is, I already know this is not going to be easy. As you go through life, you're going to come across opportunities where you can get one over an enemy, a detractor, a critic, a naysayer, someone who's against you. There's going to be opportunities to do that. When that happens, I want to ask you to resist the temptation to humiliate them, even when the chance presents itself, even when you feel like they're really asking for it. Resist the temptation. When you humiliate someone, it will lead to more negativity. That is a guarantee. So the challenge is the opposite. Whenever possible, give your critics, your enemies, a way to exit out of a bad situation for them with their dignity intact. Not easy. But if the Tao was easy, everyone would be a Tao master. So I want you to do what is difficult. I want you to practice the Tao that transcends beyond ordinary thinking. That is really my biggest message for you today.
Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.